This lecture is covering Chapter 5 from the supplemental text from Cormier Nurius Osborn, which is addressing listening responses. So let's get started. During this lecture, we're going to cover 5 main skills that are part of the listening responses that I really want to make sure that you focus on, and that is clarification, paraphrasing, reflection, summarization, and empathy, which is really used throughout your work with clients. So for clarification, we are listening for accuracy. That is the whole purpose of using the skill. And I want to segue into reminding you that all of these skills are used throughout your work with your client. And so it's very hard to compartmentalize and just clarify solely for the first 5 minutes with your client, because you're going to be doing these interchangeably. In the same capacity, empathy should be overriding everything, as well as your ability to be warm and genuine. So those are the ongoing skills that happen no matter what. These skills that we're going to discuss in specific in this lecture will be happening sprinkled throughout your session. And so when you use clarification, the purpose is so that you can understand accurately what has just been transmitted to you. You'll use this when the client may share something with you that may seem vague or ambiguous. Often then your reply may be a mix of paraphrasing with a clarification question, where you're trying to understand exactly what that term meant. So some of the sentence stems that you can use when you're doing clarification include, do you mean that? Or are you saying that? Or can you clarify that? Or can you describe for me what you mean by blank? Followed by a rephrasing of the client message. So if your client is talking about how their life is a complete wreck, then you can clarify that further by saying, can you describe for me what you mean when you say your life is a wreck? Because what I may imagine a wreck to mean might be very different from your client. And so remember, since we come from the posture of not knowing and really understanding and wanting to know the client's perceptions, we need to clarify so that those kind of ambiguous terms and themes that we hear our client use, we can make sure that we are accurately understanding them to match what the client is intending them to mean. So use this when you're just unsure of what meanings might mean, or if you want to just check your understanding. So some steps to clarifying, and the chapter is very detailed with giving you steps. I don't want you to stress too much about mastering the steps per se, but have a visual or context of how this works. For some people, the steps are very helpful so that they can be sequential in executing the steps and executing the skills. For other people, it may burden you down, but I want you to have access to it so that you can see how it will help you, and for some this will help put more of a parameter around these skills. So as this client just told me, are there any vague parts or missing pieces that I need so I can have a better understanding? And if so, what are they? And then how can I hear, see, or grasp a way to start this response? So once I hear this vague term of the life is a wreck, and I might start to think, okay, I need to clarify on that. And so maybe I might ask by asking her, can you let me know what it means when you say your life is a wreck? What does that look like to you? Or what does that mean to you? Clarification is listening for accuracy. Paraphrasing is listening for understanding. And you use paraphrasing by rephrasing the content part of the message. So what is it that the client has told you? What's the situation, the event, the person, the idea, the facts, the data? What is it that they've just given you information-wise? And you're going to restate that back to the client. So an example might be, so what I'm hearing you say is that your schedule is quite busy with a variety of commitments. Notice that this is the content. I'm focusing on the schedule and what she's just told me, the information piece of her message. Something you want to make sure when you're doing these skills is that you're restating it in a comfortable way for your wording so that you don't seem like you're just parroting back what the client has just said. So an example would be, it seems like, or appears as though, or it sounds like, or what I'm understanding is, and these are all ways you can start your paraphrase. So that way it helps you segue your understanding and then allowing the client to correct it or to say, no, that's right. So these are some ways that when you're using paraphrasing with your clients, and you use it throughout the session because your clients are going to be giving you a lot of information. And so being able to throw snippets in there where even if it's just a few words where you're saying, things are really stressful, huh? And that allows them to then elaborate further. Or you're seeming, there's a lot going on and more on your plate than you were imagining that would happen at this point. Whatever the case may be, it allows the client to feel heard and to feel like they can elaborate further if they need to, or correct it if maybe you had misunderstood something. So a few steps in paraphrasing. 1, you want to attend to and recall the message. So bottom line, what have you just heard the client tell you? Once you've heard that, identify what are those content pieces that you would need to restate or rephrase. You want to pull out those themes. You're not just going to rattle off everything you've just heard, because that would be redundant, but instead, what are those main key points that you need to restate back to the client and make sure that you're tracking with them, as well as to help them feel heard. Figure out what sentence stem is the best way for you to start off your paraphrase. I gave you a few examples in the previous slide, but Table 5.2 has a lot of other options to review. So see what feels natural for you and mix it up so that you don't feel like you're always saying the same thing. And then use that sentence stem and translate the key content into your own words. Again, you want to make it yours, make it comfortable and genuine, and just pull out those themes, those main things you've heard the client say. We talk about echoing keywords where you're pulling out the recurring themes and the recurring statements. And so pull those out and use those, but in the rest of the paraphrase, use your own wording so that you feel comfortable and it seems more natural. And then once you've shared that with your client, assess for effectiveness, because you will be able to tell if you are on track. The client will maybe agree with you and say, yeah, exactly, or But if you're wrong, they will also say, no, that's not exactly what I meant at all. And then they can help correct your understanding. So make sure that you're also tuning in after you've paraphrased back to the client. You're tuning in for their reaction so that you can make sure to fix something if maybe you've misunderstood. Reflection and paraphrasing are very similar in that you're restating something back to the client. The biggest difference, now tune in, the biggest difference between paraphrasing and reflection is that paraphrasing, you are restating back the content to the client. So the facts, the data, the information. Whereas in reflection, you're restating back the feeling. So it has to do with feeling. So remember that paraphrasing is content, reflection has to do with feeling. So you're reflecting back, or you're rephrasing back the client's feelings or the affective part of their message. So whatever they've just shared with you, what are those feelings that either underpin the message or that they've already expressed to you? So for example, an example of reflection would be, so you're feeling angry that your girlfriend betrayed your trust. Notice how in that reflection I have focused on the anger, the feeling, versus just dealing with the data or the information. So you can see how these overlap very easily, because that's also, if we elaborate further on the content of which he or she may have just said, it also can be that it's more of a mix of paraphrasing with reflection. But in order to sift it out so that you can understand the difference, paraphrasing deals with rephrasing content, reflection deals with rephrasing feelings. And that's what I want you to know so that you can use those skills throughout your time with your clients. So based on what you've said, it seems you're quite frustrated. The feeling here is the frustration. And so that's what you're highlighting and pulling that out. This opens an avenue for you to be able to explore more about the feelings behind the circumstance. Sometimes people will just tell you the data and the information of what's going on, and there's a whole nother layer of feelings that are happening. Sometimes they may not need to go to that other layer of feelings, but this is a helpful tool that when they are offering you those feelings, that you can invite more processing and dialogue because of the reflection that you are using. Something that I want to make sure to note, because it can be very easy to then want to become the reflection masters, where if the client remotely just seems to look a certain way or makes a comment, then it's very easy to want to assume that you know exactly what they're feeling, and then you want to label it. Remember, we don't do that. We don't label or assume or presume what our clients may be feeling or going through. Instead, I want you to listen and really tune into what they're saying, how they've said it, and then if they've shared those feelings, reflect the feelings that you've already heard them express. So I don't want you to fall into the pit of trying to label all the feelings that are there, even if they may not be expressly stated by your client. Instead, go with what's already been given to you. So if they tell you, I'm just so mad right now, and I just can't believe this, and they go on about how mad they feel, then being able to state back to them, this is a really difficult situation that you're going through, which is paraphrase, and then switching gears to reflection, I can just imagine that this would be a really hard thing to handle, and I can sense that you are really angry about what's going on. And there's the reflection that I've just stated. So reflection helps clients to express, manage, and process those feelings that they're going through while also feeling like you're understanding what they are sharing with you. So this is why reflection is such a helpful skill. Not only do we want to rephrase back what clients are telling us by content, but we want to also honor the feelings that are being shared with us as well. And so that's why you use both skills interchangeably throughout the interview. So some steps in reflection of feelings. These are going to look just like the other steps. You want to listen and key into what are those affect words that are being shared. You know, if they're saying they're disappointed, they're overwhelmed, they're frustrated, they're stressed out, sometimes clients may use other words. You know, where they feel strung out. Well, that's not technically a feeling word, but what's the context of that to see if maybe strung out to them, if you need to ask them to clarify what that means, that would be a great step. And then that might help you understand if strung out means that they are completely at their wits' end and they're anxious and they are overwhelmed. So that will help you to give context. In the reading, table 5.3 gives you more common feeling words that you can refer to so that you can make sure that you have a nice selection of options that you can provide your client. So watch the nonverbal behavior while they are talking to you so you can key on those pieces and truly get the overall context of what they're sharing. And then reflect back the feelings to the client, either using their words or a similar matching word. You want to be careful no matter what you do when it comes to paraphrasing, reflection, and summarization and clarification that you don't fall into the trap of parroting back. We are not parrots. We are highly skilled, effective clinicians and helpers in this process. And so anyone can just rattle off what they just heard verbatim, especially those that have great memory. That won't make your client feel heard. Instead, you want to key into those things that are themes and patterns, and you want to be able to reflect that back to the client using your words so that it's more natural, and then plugging in those keywords as they relate. And so when you're reflecting those feelings back to the client, either use the exact word that they used if that feels natural, but if you start sensing, man, that feels like I'm just stating the obvious. If she said she was angry and I say, wow, you're really angry about this, well, that might make her feel that I'm listening. If I do that several times, it might make it seem a bit repetitive and a bit like I'm parroting. And so be careful not to parrot. We don't parrot. Instead, you can use a similar word that means the same type of intensity of feeling, or if using their exact wording, since it's a keyword, is helpful, then you can do that as well. So you use the reflection statement sentence stem, so however you're going to start off your statement, and then add the context of the feelings of the situation. So instead of just saying you're feeling angry, or you're feeling mad about this, being able to bring in the context of it. So you're feeling really angry that you had put down the deposit for the security deposit for your room, and all the arrangements were made, and then your friend just completely backed out on you when it came to being able to live together for the school year. Those kind of pieces help give the context to the feeling. So it's not just you're feeling frustrated about this, but you're feeling frustrated and then you paraphrase part of that content with it. So you can see how these things really just overlap. And once you learn the skills, you're going to start using them interchangeably without even intentionally feeling like you're switching from one to another. It's just going to become a natural stew, so to speak, of all of these skills that you're mixing together so that way it can really enhance the listening process as you use those skills with your client. And the final piece is you want to assess the effectiveness of your reflection. Just like we did with clarification and paraphrasing, when you reflect back to your client, if you are on track, you will know it by their body language, by their response to you. If what you have said is not on track, your clients will also tell you, whether it's a facial expression or a resistance, or maybe they might say something like, well, not quite, and then they might fix it. Make sure that you're keeping tuned in, so that way if you are off base, you can ask the client, I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood that. Could you help me understand a little bit better as far as what you were just trying to share with me? So when it comes to empathy, there are many ways to convey empathy, both verbal and nonverbal. We're going to first hone in on the verbal piece in this lecture. There are other ways that we can discuss nonverbal means in other lectures, but for this one we will be honing in on the verbal. We show empathy when we show our desire to comprehend, when we are actively engaged in the process with the client. We're not just listening for the sake of listening. We're not just asking questions to pass the time, but we are really seeking to understand their view, and we're committed to that process. And if we make a mistake, we want to be able to know what the mistake is because we want to understand them accurately. That is a way of showing empathy. When that client knows that you are really involved and invested in this process and you want to understand them fully, that's going to be empowering, as well as it will show them that you care. Another way of conveying empathy is making sure that you stay on track with what's important to the client. You're not bringing your own agenda or your own ideas into the mix, but you're truly letting the client share with you, and then you're exploring what's most important to them. Using those verbal responses, whether it's the the sure, the yeah, okay, those kind of verbal encouragers that might help your client feel like you're tracking and that you're empathizing with them. And so you can use those verbal responses not only just to encourage them as they share, but you can use them to bridge or add on to something else that the client has shared with you. So this does seem really difficult. And so you're tying in not just an encouraging word, but you're also then tying in some other elements of what they have just shared with you to convey that empathy. One thing that you want to make sure, sometimes we can fall into the trap. Remember, these clients are not your friend or family or a loved one. They are your client. And so there's a different way of relating and a different way of empathizing. When your loved one goes through something, you might say something like, it's going to be okay, or I'm here with you, or you might hug them. That's not the way we empathize with our clients. That's inappropriate by professional boundaries. So you want to be careful with falling into the trap of avoiding of giving assurances, saying things like, don't worry, it's going to work out, or I'm sure you're going to be just great, or this is going to pass. It may not. And we don't want to give false assurances to our clients that might make us feel better for the moment because we've said something nice to them and we want to empathize with them. But really, in the end, might be more harmful than helpful. So stay away from giving those false assurances that we might be used to doing in our own personal relationships, and instead stick with what you do know and use the information the client's giving you. Pull from their strengths, what kind of strengths and ways that they've survived, what things that they've done that has helped them to succeed. Pull from those things to convey empathy versus trying to just say, oh, I'm so sorry, it's going to be okay, because it may not. And we want to make sure that we work with our client and we don't pity our client. So the last skill, summarization. This is just like paraphrasing, except it's a long version. Paraphrasing is the small little sister of summarization, and so paraphrasing is going to be short, condensed versions and little snippets that you use throughout your session, whereas summarization is going to be used for a larger content of material. Let's say your client has given you a lot of information, and they've told an extensive story and you've got a lot of details to take in. Summarization is a longer version of paraphrasing because you're going to recap that longer sequence of messaging that the client has shared with you. In the same way, it's really handy when you're at the end of your session to use summarization to summarize everything that was just talked about and then to make a plan for the next session. So listen for those themes. What are those patterns? Remember, we don't parrot, so you don't want to just start from the beginning and rattle off everything you heard without it seeming like you've tried to make those connections. So use your own words, make it personal, and pull out what are those themes that you've picked up along the way, and then rephrase them back to the client. As I said, it's helpful with tying lots of information together so you can regroup. It's good to identify those themes or slow down the session. Sometimes you might have a client that rambles and can talk a lot. Summarization is a great way to still let them feel heard and say, okay, well, I've heard you express X, Y, and Z. And you can rephrase and summarize that back to them. And then you can segue into the next question or the next statement that's going to help to move the direction of the session in maybe a different way. So it helps with the pacing and it also helps with reviewing progress made in your session. So some steps to summarization, just like the others. Make sure that you attend to and recall what's been said. So what have they said so far? And then what are the themes or patterns, the things that keep repeating, the main ideas. It's just like English 101 where you have to write a main paper and you have the main idea and then all the supporting details. So pull out from what the client has just shared with you, what are those main ideas, and then you summarize that. Don't worry about going in every single tangential direction and covering all of the words that they've said. Instead, just cover the main ideas that they have just said. use that sentence stem to start off your response and to start off your summarization. And then once you've summarized and shared that with the client, I like to say, I like to start off my summarization of, well, I just want to take a moment and kind of recap what I've just heard so far and just make sure that I'm on track with what I'm understanding. And so then I'll summarize pieces of the conversation, and then at the end of it, I'll ask something like, is there anything I've missed, or is there something that I've misunderstood? And that way I can let the client let me know if I messed up something, and they can help correct it. So let's have you practice now. Now that you've gone through the steps, for clarification, let's say you have a client, and this is what they tell you. I don't know how much more I can take. My life is an utter disaster. A disaster, I tell you. So that's what the client has just told you. How would you use clarification with this client? You can pause this presentation so you can think about it, and then once you're ready, you can press play. A way to do this is, as I look at this statement and I hear this statement, I don't know how much more I can take. My life is an utter disaster, I tell you. I would want to know, what exactly does it mean by this life being an utter disaster? So I would personally ask the client, so I hear you saying that your life is just an utter disaster. Can you help explain to me what utter disaster means to you? And in this way, the client could help break down what utter disaster means, since they've used it a couple times in this statement, and that will help me have a clear understanding of what a disaster means to them. So I jumped ahead of myself, but if you want to try it again, and make sure throughout each of these practices you are weaving in empathy as well. So it's not just saying, so what does a disaster mean? If the client is in tears or if they're upset, just jumping into wanting to get to the nitty-gritty logistics is going to completely devalue the kind of empathy that you want to share with your client. So notice how earlier I said, so it sounds like things are a lot more intense and a lot more stressful than you had anticipated, and you mentioned that your life is an utter disaster. Can you help me understand what utter disaster looks like to you? And so notice how in the beginning part of that statement, before I jumped into clarification, I did express empathy by letting them know that I sensed that this was a lot more than they had expected. Let's go to the next one. So your turn to practice paraphrasing this time. So remember, paraphrasing is rephrasing content, the content of the client's message. So the client tells you, I don't have the desire to get out of bed in the mornings. I feel like I'm just going through my day in this huge fog. It's not like me to be like this, but I just can't shake it. I'm ready for this to get better. It has to. So if your client is telling you this, go ahead and practice the skill of paraphrasing with this client and pause this presentation now. Okay, you've given that a chance. A way that you can paraphrase, remember there are many different ways, so this is just one way to do it, but there are many other ways that you can come up with that are still proper and accurate. But if I heard a client telling me this, that they are having all these feelings, and I would say something to the effect of, so I'm hearing you say that things right now, you're feeling like you're going through this fog, and this isn't your usual self, but you're ready for something to change, you're ready for something to get better. And that would be the way that I would paraphrase. Notice the tone of voice, notice the inflections used that portray empathy. So you can try that again and try, if you didn't feel like you were as empathic the first time, try it again. Let's practice reflection. Here's your client's statement. They tell you, I am so mad at her. I can't believe she's gone. I mean, she wasn't ever the greatest mom, but she was my mom. Why would she choose to leave us like this? I can't believe she just left us. I trusted her. Remember, reflection deals with rephrasing the feeling. So let's try it. Go ahead and pause this presentation now and practice reflecting back to this client the feelings that you just heard. I would listen to this, and as I hear my client expressing these thoughts to me and these emotions, I would say something like, it sounds like you're feeling betrayed and you're feeling angry at what's gone on so far with the situation with your mom and the fact that she's left you and you didn't anticipate that to happen. That reflects some of the feelings that the clients just shared with me. And then usually I would segue to something else, whether it's another question or it might be a statement that goes along with that. So go ahead and you can try that one more time if you feel like you're missing some empathy, and you can try it one more time, and you can pause the presentation now. Last practice, let's try summarization. So here's a client that's sharing this with you. I've been working with this company for 15 years, and they have the nerve to lay me off. Just like that, you would think that they would show me more loyalty to an employee that has been loyal to them. Do you know how many opportunities I had to quit and work elsewhere? But no, I stayed with them. I believed in them. Now, I'm the one scrambling for a mean of employment. I'm 55 years old with barely a high school education. Who's going to hire me now? Then my daughter's in the process of divorcing her husband, and the kids without a place, leaving her and the kids without a place to stay. So I have to figure out a way to take care of those extra mouths. My house needs a new roof, and those are expensive. There's just too much happening at once. All right, go ahead and practice the skill of summarizing with this client. Pause this presentation now. And how I would practice summarizing back to this client, I would say, I'm hearing quite a few things that you've had to deal with all at once, and I'm just amazed with your ability to handle all the things that have been happening that aren't expected. It sounds like working for a company for 15 years and then feeling like they were disloyal to you by laying you off, and now having to deal with knowing that your daughter's going to need extra support, and the children and the extra resources that you might need to help cover their expenses as well as take care of your home. There's a lot going on. Now notice how that was mixed with weaving empathy in with the summarization. I pulled out the key points. They were laid off for 15 years. They feel like they were completely betrayed. Now they have to worry about finding a job, and then they have this daughter and her children that are needing a place to stay. So if you want to try it one more time and weave in some empathy, go ahead and pause the presentation now so you can do so. And to wrap it all up, as I keep saying, keep practicing. These skills don't come overnight. They are an ongoing, lifelong process. And so the more you practice, not just in concentrated doses where you have to practice with a friend or with a pseudo client or for a video, but in actuality, practicing in your day-to-day. These are conversation and communication skills, so use them with your loved ones. Try them out with your friends. Experiment with your supervisor and see how you can make these skills yours. The more you integrate them in your day-to-day life, the easier they will get and the more natural they will become. I guarantee it. So keep practicing, because practicing makes permanent. See you next time.